But you know, what else is important? I mean, what are the other things that can help? And I would tell you today, I guess my message is that sometimes it's the little things that are just as important as those big things that took years to develop. I'm going to talk about a couple of them. One of them is relationships. The need to build and establish and maintain good relationships. What do I mean by that? You don't have to take a class in it. It's basically remember what your mother taught you. Play nice with people. Please say please and thank you. Whatever you go into and whatever field you're finding, you're going to find you don't just deal with formulas and the science and hardware and things. You're going to be dealing every day with people. It's a people world, and you're going to have to work with supervisors, your peers, subordinates, shareholders, perhaps the media, vendors, customers, people that finance your business, and on and on and on. You're going to have to deal with family, neighbors, and you're going to be interfacing with people. Consequently, I think one of the important skills in building relationships is effective communication. Not just communication, but effective communication. And some keys to that are as follows. Number one is listen. When we think of communication, it's usually what am I going to say? It's just as important, if not more important, to listen. Number two is to listen. And number three, you got it. It's to listen. Also, obviously, look people in the eye, smile, relax, ask questions, be polite. And did I say listen? That's important. By the way, folks, when you go out and go into a meeting, we all carry BlackBerries. You're sitting there, maybe playing tic-tac-toe on yours now. When you go into a meeting, don't pull that thing out, have it under the table and check an email or see why it buzzed. When you do that, you're telling the person that's speaking at the meeting that they're not important. You're telling them, I don't really care what you're saying, and you're telling them, I don't want to listen to you. Put it away and turn it off. I guarantee you can live without it for an hour. And if you have to use it, yeah. I'm not alone, as you can see. If you have to use it, excuse yourself and leave the room, go use it and come back in. But that is an insult to folks when you're trying to communicate with them to have your attention on your BlackBerry. The other thing is you need to speak effectively. You need to treat people with respect, and there's a number of facets to that. I'm reminded of the story of the corporate executive whose hobby was hot air ballooning. And one Saturday morning he had an appointment for a late lunch, but he thought he'd run out and get in a balloon ride. It's a beautiful, crisp day. He took his balloon out, went up, was having a great ride, and suddenly a microburst came up in the atmosphere, and the wind started blowing, and it spun the balloon around one way and the other and bounced him around. And when it finally finished and the balloon kind of settled out, he looked around and he realized he was hopefully lost. He'd lost his bearings, didn't know where he was. And he allowed the balloon to start drifting down closer to the ground to see if he could get his bearings or find someone. And as he looked around, he saw a lady walking on a path beneath him, and he drifted down a little closer to where he could shout at her, and he yelled down to get her attention, and she turned around and didn't see anything, and he yelled again, and finally she looked up and saw this balloon. And he looked down at her and he said, "Lady," he said, "can you help me?" And he explained what had happened. The balloon's been spun around. I've lost my bearings. I'm supposed to meet a friend of mine for lunch. He said, I'm late now. I don't know where I am, and consequently, I don't even know how to get there. He said, "Could you please help me?" And the lady looked at him for a moment, and she studied him, and she said, "Well, yes." She said, "You are in a hot air balloon." And she said, "You're hovering approximately 75 feet above the ground." She said, "You're at about 32 degrees and 52 minutes north latitude and about 98 degrees and 47 minutes west longitude." She stopped. He thought for a second. He looked down. He said, "Lady, you must be an engineer." She looked back up at the executive and said, "Well, how could you tell? I am an engineer." He said, well, the information you gave me was technically accurate. So the information you gave me was absolutely correct. But unfortunately, I still don't have any clue where I am. And as a practical matter, lady, you haven't been any help to me at all. Well, she shot back to him, said, you must be in management. He said, how could you tell that I was in management? She said, well, to begin with, you don't have any idea where you are. You don't have a clue where you're going. You arose to your current position using vast quantities of hot air. She said, you've made promises you can't keep, and you look to people beneath you to solve your problems. She said, mister, as a practical matter, you're in the same spot you were in before we ever met, but now somehow it's my fault. It's a great story. I think it shows, though, the executive didn't communicate to the engineer with respect. Additionally, I think the engineer didn't communicate effectively. Although she gave him accurate data, she didn't size up her audience and really didn't help and answer the question in a language that he could understand. So that relationship was dead on arrival. It was never going to go anywhere, and nothing good was going to come out of it. And yet they were only trying to exchange some simple information. I think the story also, by the way, demonstrates, I mentioned titles a while ago, a problem with titles. They're not really what they're cracked up to be. Being an executive can be thought to be wonderful, but on the other hand, it can also be perceived very negatively from time to time. An engineer, people have hold engineers in high regard. On the other hand, you can be perceived as some sort of a techno geek, perhaps, from time to time. Of course, we all know that engineers are really accountants with a personality, and so that's not going to be a problem, I think, with this group. But don't let titles get in the way of establishing good relationships, and sometimes they can. I've had a lot of titles in my career. I went from junior engineer to chairman and CEO of a company. But one of my most fascinating jobs was a title I had, and nobody in the company knew what it meant. I was the first one that had ever had it. It was called Manager of Regulatory Services, and I dealt with the Public Utility Commission when it was created in 1975. Actually, what I managed was two people. People would call me and say, gee, what is that job? Because the word manager seemed to connotate some kind of a big deal. To tell you the truth, what was neat about it is some of the projects I worked on had direct impact on the success of the company. And in the annual report to shareholders, I read about those projects. They didn't read about me, but they read about the projects. And I derived some tremendous satisfaction of having been a part of those projects and those teams, as opposed to the personal recognition you might want to get. Bigger titles came later, but to be blunt, folks, the bigger the title you get, the more likely it is you're just going to be the one named in a lawsuit. So don't go there. Always treat people with respect. I'm going to come back to your mother. Mothers, what they told you again. It's funny how your mother is going to get smarter and smarter. The older you get, they're generally right on. But treat people with respect. In the hot air balloon story, the manager wasn't very patient. He wasn't respectful to the engineer and his comments, and it created an instant hostility. Treat people with respect, whether they have a title or don't have a title, whether they're in a white-collar type role or a blue-collar type role. Skin color makes absolutely no difference about anything. Treat everybody exactly the same. You're going to deal with people with different cultures. We're in a global environment. Learn about the cultures, and they're just different. They're not bad. And learn how to work with folks in there to create good relationships. The golden rule is right on, and thank you out there, all you moms. We appreciate what you tell us.